This is my second in the two sessions that I just offered to run for free. Like some of you, I've always been responsible for professional learning, staff development, leadership, and I now do it full time. And lots of people have been saying to me they're struggling with lack of budget, sort of like competing priorities, and not quite sure how to weave it all in. So I did the session on Thursday, all about leadership development, and coaching and how to curate that. And this is more specifically tonight about DEIB. Both recordings and both decks will then be sent out to you. I'm really happy to share for you to give you ideas, and to look at some different approaches. So it is going to be quite packed. Feel free to do questions and thoughts in the chat as we go, and I'll do a Q&A at the end. I actually had a lot more content for this one. It's really interesting how my own priorities, and offers changed so much in the last 5 years since leaving headship as well. So I've given you a golden circle. I know two of you were here with me last week. I'll start with why golden circle about DEIB specifically, and don't worry if you're calling it EDI, DNI, whatever you're calling it. I don't really care. But being clear on what is it we're trying to achieve and why do we need to develop it? Why do we need to curate a strategy? My answer to that question is it's very scattergun. A lot of the schools and trusts I'm working with, it feels really fragmented. It feels really reactive, and we've got to make it coherent and cohesive. The how do we make this everyone's business is the ongoing question. I want you to think about the journey we've been on with safeguarding over the last decade or 2 decades, and where we went from legal compliance to it being a culture of vigilance, and every single adult gets it and knows it's their responsibility. We're not there yet with DIB. We're a long way away. But that is my vision for this, that every adult in your building or buildings understands how they can contribute to that wider commitment and that strategy. And then the final one, what's the desired impact you want to have by really thinking about your DIB training on that wider school community? I do fear sometimes that it's become about lived experience and storytelling, and it's not always tangible about impact and how to apply it to your role and to your setting and to your curriculum. And I want us to think about that. Like if you're going to spend money and get speakers in and trainers in, what is it you're trying to achieve, and what's the long-term impact going to be, with that investment? So I think most of you know who we are, but Diverse Ed started 7 years ago as a grassroots group. 5 years ago, we became a training provider. And we think a lot about how we communicate our commitment to this work. And just like you have your vision, mission, and values as a school, college, or trust, I'd ask you to really go back to how are you articulating your commitment to DEIB? It's often not very clear. It's often also a separate story to your existing story. And I think it's often a disconnect that people don't understand that this is an institutional commitment and how it speaks to the rest of your vision, mission, and values. And you might be talking about it, but if I was looking to come and work at one of your schools or send my kids to one of your schools, would I see your commitment explicitly articulated on your website? It's often not clear. So please do have a little look at that kind of messaging piece and think about how you onboard all your new pupils, parents, and staff in September. I think it's a good time to revisit that conversation. So our hero image from Diverse Educators has those 9 colours on the floor because we really anchor this work through the Equality Act, through the 9 protected characteristics, through considering what an inclusive workplace and inclusive school culture looks like and feels like for all of those people. Some of our competitors and collaborators only look at one protected characteristic, and that's absolutely fine. But I do worry about the schools, colleges, and trusts who are doing one a year. Kids go to a primary school for 7 years, and kids go to a secondary school with a sixth form for 7 years, and there are 9 protected characteristics. So we've got to think about this work holistically, but also intersectionally. And for many of my team, they coexist in 4 or 5 of these protected characteristics. So you can't talk to one of them about being black and not being female or not being a parent. Our mantra, be where you're celebrated, not tolerated. I could do a whole hour just about the British values and how problematic they are, but thinking about how we articulate, how we fulfill the British values within our settings. I do a lot of school visits, and primary schools tend to be more guilty of this than secondary schools. The first thing I see is either a tree, a hand, or a Union Jack with the 5 British values around it. And then I look at the whole of these children from these diverse identities, and many of them don't identify as being British. Okay, and I want us to really think about that, like the kind of the values we are talking to our young people about, because I haven't met someone yet who wants to be tolerated. I think when we're teaching tolerance, we've got to think about how we teach through that and beyond that, and what values do our young people and the adults want to be treated with. So you're on the left-hand side there, you've got that reminder of those nine protected characteristics. I have built a brilliant team over the last 7 years, and there are currently 15 of us who deliver diverse ed training. Between us, we cover all nine of the protected characteristics, so there's lived experience within the team. We also have other themes and experiences that come to the table. Some of my team are adoptive parents, some are multilingual, lots of intersectionality, lots of us are going through perimenopause, menopause. We've got lots of experience around or expertise around mental health and well-being, and also the RSE or PSHE curriculum. So that's kind of what we bring to the table as a collective. We've also got people who have worked primary, secondary, state, independent, college, universities, and we've got people who coach, people who govern, and people who have held various leadership roles. So we can kind of talk to, I guess, any level of the institution. And whenever we run training about DEIB, we always frame it through what I call the three C's. I want you to think about how you are developing consciousness, confidence, and competence across all of your stakeholders. So where is their awareness of their own identity, their own lived experience, and how that shapes their worldview and or brings bias? Where's the confidence in the agency and the empowerment around the language, around the behaviours, around how we challenge things? And where's the inhibitions? And what competence do we need to be developing in all those different people who hold all those different roles across the school? So going back to my parallel to safeguarding, you know what safeguarding looks like for your site team. You know what safeguarding looks like for your TAs, for your governors, and we need to think about DEIB like that. What's the foundational mandatory training that all staff need? And then what is the kind of the bespoke personalised training that each stakeholder group needs based on the roles they hold and the functions they fulfil within your setting? So one of the first things we always talk about is how we go about co-creating safe but brave spaces. Anyone who's been classroom based, the first thing you do when you meet a group of pupils is you create a social contract. It's not, hi, here's Miss Wilson's rules, please follow them. We talk it out, we agree it, we own it, we take responsibility for those behaviours. I don't think we always do that with the adult stakeholders in our settings. And I'd really invite you to think about how you can actively encourage anyone who line manages or anyone who holds space for others, team leaders, meeting chairs, at the start of the academic year to build some time in for social contracting. It will make such a massive difference to when things get tricky throughout the year. What we tend to find is when something goes wrong in November, people are trying to social contract and resolve and mediate simultaneously. And you need to separate those two things out. So we want our classrooms to be safe for our pupils. We also want our staff rooms and our boardrooms to be safe for our staff and those with responsibility. But I want you to also think about what other spaces are you creating in your setting that would be named kind of safe spaces. I think colleges and secondary schools often have more of these spaces because they have a bigger building and they have more staff. But I also want you to think about different sort of like staff safe spaces, but also virtual safe spaces. So when we launched our book 5 years ago, we launched our Mighty Networks community space because Twitter X was not a safe space for people to be talking about DEIB. So we've got a couple of thousand people in there. So creating those closed spaces, I think, is really important. I have the same conversation multiple times with people who hold similar roles. So we've got networking spaces I curate for ITTE leads, people responsible for teacher training, DEIB leads, the person responsible for DEIB, EDI, and HR leads, because I'm having more and more conversations with people who are responsible for people development. So they're half-termly virtual opportunities to come together. As things happen in the world, we've then curated some special events. So we've had some trans solidarity events. We've now held 3, where people who identify as being trans and non-binary come to a virtual space and we hold space for them, but allies come and support as well. And similarly with Muslim solidarity, we've had a couple of events where people have been feeling very unsafe in society and very unsafe in the system. So we hold those spaces, and there's lots of other spaces you can also perhaps be aware of. One of the things that we're beginning to pilot is the idea of a kind of a hub model. So I relocated from Oxford to Bath 2 years ago now, and I've got quite a big network in Bristol. So we have a half-termly opportunity for teachers from the area to come together to talk about DEIB, and one of the schools in central Bristol holds that for us. I then got contacted by Sheffield, could they replicate it up there? So we've been supporting Learn Sheffield with that model, and we're about to pilot one in Surrey as well. So thinking about how you can create that regular space for those who want to be talking about these things and explore these things can come together. So I thought I'd start with all of our free stuff, things to have on your radar. I've had about 20 emails this week. When is your lovely DEIB calendar going to be published? I usually do a spreadsheet of all the dates in the whole year, and last year we published a beautiful branded DEIB calendar for the academic year, and it's got every single awareness day, week, month, and religious and faith-based festival on it. But as you can imagine, it takes hours and hours and hours to put together. And my brand has just had a bereavement, unfortunately. So it is going to be done at some point during the summer. It should be available by the end of August. But on the link, when you get the slides, you can see this year's one. The dates won't really change. It might just be they fall into a slightly different weekend or week sort of like scenario. I think that's a great starting point for you to think about what are we putting a spotlight on? What are we talking about and thinking about? What's happening in the assembly room, the PSHE room, the tutor room to keep these conversations going? And who's feeling neglected or not thought about or sorry, not talked about. And I think that's the kind of the umbrella helicopter kind of view to have around the calendar. Our blog's really popular. So we've been running a blog now for 5 years, and I usually publish 2 blogs a week. So there's 500 think pieces on the website. And for some of my DIB leads, I say just pick like 40 and put them in a list and send them to your head's PA and ask them to send one out a week. So really simple way to curate it, strip feed it. I cap how long those blogs are because no one's got longer than 10 minutes to read a blog. They are really diverse and really reflective. People sharing best practice, people sharing lived experience. But there's 500 there, so you can very quickly pull out and do one a week to really do that drip feeding and that kind of like that dialogue. My team love to write books, and lots of people in our network have published books. I'm a former English teacher. So one of the events I host every March is a World Book Day event to amplify and celebrate people from our network who have written a book. If you go back 10 years ago, a lot of educational books were written by straight white men, and we've got more and more lived experience and identity groups coming forward. So we've got a bookshelf with curated reading lists, recommended reading lists, generic DEIB stuff, curriculum stuff, all the different sort of like things, themes you might want to be having a look at. And we've got a bookshelf that takes you to independent bookstores. So I know some schools have used Benny's book, Diversity in Schools, and our book, Diverse Educators Manifesto, as a themed reading piece for the whole year and creating a book club within their school to do deep dives. The manifesto, you don't have to read it in a linear way, so you can dip in and out, and it always gives you things to think about and questions to discuss at the end of each chapter. We are signposters for other people. We collaborate with lots and lots of organisations, and I've been curating the DIB directory now for 5 years. There are 210 organisations listed in it. If you know who you're looking for, they are there A to Z. If you don't know who you're looking for, you can search it by protected characteristic. So say, for example, you want to do some work around gender identity, you can go to the gender reassignment section, and I think there's about 10 organisations there who support schools, colleges and trusts specifically with gender identity. And it helps for you to then think about who you're signposting your beginner teachers, early career teachers, aspiring leaders to. If they are the only person with their identity in your school, college or trust, it's good for you to know where perhaps they can get that support and build that community. I promise I only do one newsletter a month. I absolutely hate newsletters that send me too many emails and too much information. Once a month, I curate all the stuff that's going on in our network, but different organisations also send me shout outs to things they're running, usually free events, free programs, competitions, etc., opportunities. So if you sign up for our newsletter, you'll get that, and you can then pull out perhaps the bits that are relevant to your setting. Podcasts, we've got two podcasts with 4 series between them. We did a podcast all around beginner teachers with Nasbit, so we've got 2 series for that. And we also did a podcast around the book, and we had 2 series talking to the different contributors to the book. I personally prefer to get a book and read a book, but lots of people prefer audio now for driving, walking the dog, etc. So you can also curate those 40 episodes from the podcast we have done over the years as well. Other resources that we offer for free, going back to the literacy of this work, we often get asked to help with glossaries. So I do need to do an update, but a couple of years ago, we pulled together a glossary A to Z of DEIB. When it was published, I got lots of thank yous, and then I got a cheeky request, can we have one for the acronyms in the space as well, please? So there are actually 2 glossaries on the website. You can download them as PDFs, but you can also localize them, and you can add in words that are coming up in your setting, and always feel free to let us know if we've got words missing. training. I do think like the word of the week approach we use with children to build their vocabulary, you could do a concept of the week or a term of the week with your staff bulletins again, just to really unpack some of those terms that we assume everyone understands. But most people who say psychological safety, gaslighting, microaggressions can't actually define it for you. So giving them the kind of the language's power, I think, is really important. I've mentioned the reading list already. We've also curated some playlists. So we use lots of video clips in our various programs and events. We've got a YouTube list. And if you ever have a cancellation in a briefing or a staff training, they are all there. So you can pull up some brilliant TED Talks by Chimamanda Adichie, by Dr. Radine Bishops, like some of the kind of the key thought leadership in this space. And Benny's curated Padlets for the different subjects. So for the people in your curriculum teams looking at diversifying history, maths, physics, whatever it is, there was a Padlet for each of those subjects with sort of like 10 to 12 sort of resources to get started. So just having those ready to share as and when required, they are all there for you to hopefully reduce, save time and energy. The most popular part of our website are our toolkits. So whenever we do training, we always get great feedback, but audience is often left asking more questions than having answers because they just scratch the surface really of the kind of the topic they're looking at. So over the last 5 years, I've commissioned people with lived experience to curate toolkits on the key themes. We've somehow managed to get to 43. So there are 43 toolkits on the website. There are ones on themes such as flexible working, anti-racism. There are also ones on things like parental caring in the system. Masculinity is our newest one, religion and faith. So you name it, there's pretty much a toolkit on it. And they're all curated in the same way. Key information, key questions. Normally there's 6 articles, 6 blogs, 6 resources and 6 videos. So some of the schools, colleges and trusts who we've worked with for years, they do twilights where it's a DEIB twilight and there's no content. Go and pick a toolkit and spend an hour looking at a toolkit. So a great way to do free CPD where people are identifying their gaps, but it's then being personalised to what they want to learn, what gap they want to close. You don't need all staff to do all 43 toolkits. You can begin to almost like create a kind of a cascade effect where you've got different people looking at different strands. The other piece that's free, I'm sure lots of you have got relationships in your settings with different coaching providers, but we've got a partnership with CVP, and CVP are a coaching provider really committed to DEIB. So we launched a diverse ed coaching cohort for their level 5 coaching apprenticeship last year. We've currently got 15 people on it. We are recruiting for an October cohort to really think about like who gets to be a coach within your setting and who gets coaching and how can we consciously diversify the coaching space. Most coaches look like me, i.e. they are white women in their 40s and they are straight. And we really need to think about how the aspiring and emerging leaders don't often see coaches who look like them. I had a phone call from one of the CEOs of one of the London LEAs a couple of years ago saying we've had loads of grief from our head teachers this year who get free coaching, that all of our coaches are white. So thinking about how we support different people in becoming coaches and through their training they coach other people is just another mechanism, and we can help by giving you the details of that free training provision. It taps up your apprenticeship levy. The other free thing we've done is we've got a jobs board with Teacheroo. So we've got a diverse ed jobs board, but I taught them into doing free adverts for governors. So if you've got any vacancies for governors or trustees within your setting, you can literally go onto the website and post that job and it goes out into our network, into our newsletter. We've got about 7,500 people getting the newsletter at the moment, but about 18,000 people coming to the website each month. And it means that you are putting your vacancies for governance in front of people who hold diverse identities. So I learned a new statistic last week. I was at an anti-racist conference. 4% of the heads in the country are people of colour, and 3.5% of all the governors in the country are people of colour. So if we diversify the governance and trustees of our sector, we're more likely to diversify the heads and in turn the leadership pipeline. So think about how we're doing that awareness piece at the kind of at that level. So that's all of our free stuff. Let me go on to some of our paid for stuff before I give you some case studies. So this is the mixture, actually, the governance one. So we do lots of training for governors. I quite often speak at governance conferences. I did one recently for a 15 school mat in Kent. I had all the governors for about 3 hours in the morning to get them to really think about strategically what do we need to be considering around the vision of the trust. We also hold an annual half-day conference where the governor responsible for DEIB can come together and network with other governors. We do it as a half day because I'm really conscious they're already volunteering a lot of their time. Most of our conferences are normally a full day. But a couple of years ago, we did a curated webinar series with all of the big players in governance. So NGA, Governors for Schools, Agbis. There were about 5 partners who worked with us, and we curated a series of conversations with about 30 speakers. They're there, they're free. So if you've got governors and trustees who are really curious about this, they could start there, they could listen to those conversations, they could talk about them in their respective training sessions and meetings. We also host, roughly speaking, a half-termly conference. So we do 6 virtual conferences a year and 3 in-person conferences a year. The virtual conferences are thematic and pretty much fall in the same sort of like month each year. So the pastoral one was new this year because we do lots around the curriculum and we had teams asking for support with attendance behaviour and safeguarding. We do an annual conference in November for the curriculum, and that's usually like attended by about 200 people with brilliant speakers. We do our ITTE virtual conference in January, and we had 18 skits and university providers joining us this year, about 3,500 trainees. It was a fabulous day. I've mentioned the governors one already. Last week, I hosted the ECT conference. We've run that for 5 years with 6 providers, and we had 350 ECTs with us on Friday. And then we also had last Wednesday our annual virtual conference for the DEIB leader. And that's global because we have a lot of people who've trained with us in other countries, and that ran all day on Wednesday. So they are pretty much standard, sort of like punctuation marks throughout the year. We then rotate where we host in-person events. So we went to Edinburgh back in January and we launched Diverse Ed Scotland. We were going back, I think it's actually going to be in Aberdeen this year. We hosted Diverse Ed London 2 weeks ago at Highgate School, and Charterhouse are going to host us in the autumn term for one in Guildford. So I'm always looking for trusts who want to support us and host us for a Saturday conference. And I want to rotate it around the country and try and do a kind of a north-south central one each year so different people can come to them. We then run different leadership programs. I guess this is kind of like my bread and butter. I used to be an event organizer, but I love running programs and seeing people regularly. During lockdown, we launched the Leading DIB in Schools program. We're currently on cohort 25, starting this Thursday. That is a monthly session for 10 months with about 20 people, various positions, cross-stage, cross-sector, often very international, where we are curating what they need to think about and know about. So it's often either the person who's just become the DEIB leader, or the head who wants to create the role but doesn't know what the role is yet, or the person who is aspiring to be the DEIB leader within that group. We then run a more thematic series around leading inclusive workplaces. So we've run that a couple of times where a Matt might say to us, can we curate some sessions? And I get a couple of Matts together. We might have 6 sessions and look at menopause, maternity, flexible working, etc. Going back to all the different sessions we offer, we kind of pick the ones that are most relevant. We run the Leading the Diverse curriculum program. We've run that 6 times, usually with 20 to 30 people. It's usually an open cohort, but some Mats have said, can we have 30 places and just do it for us? So we work with a primary school Mat in the Milton Keynes region, and all of their phase leaders worked with us over a year, and they had that streamlined kind of like consistent, I guess, dialogue around the curriculum. A really popular one that I started running last year was Leading Courageous Conversations. We run a lot of training on that topic. Get to ask to do lots of like interactions, so interventions like one-to-one or small teams. So that's become a 6-part program as well. 2 of my team set up Pride and Progress, and they do brilliant work in the LGBT space. So we've got a 3-part program we run with them, all around LGBT inclusion in schools. And then I met Sarah years ago through the DFE funded equality grants, and I ran a program called Diverse Leaders through Harris and then through GLF schools. And the CEO of Co-op has now sponsored that program, and we're on our 2nd cohort where we've got 12 middle leaders who are people of colour who have been sponsored for the year and having training and coaching to help them break through the ceilings to get to SLT. We got 2 promotions in the 1st cohort before they even finished the program. So that's just some of the programs we run that usually run across a whole year, and you can see the different kind of contact time for each of those different spaces. I think this is my final slide on the kind of paid for stuff. We then have currently, I think it's 51 sessions, 15 training sessions by stakeholder group. So if you want a session for your trustees, for your executive team, for your pastoral team, whoever it might be, your ECTs, we've got different curated content bespoke to that role and starting point. But we've then got 36 sessions designed by theme. So that is where you want a session on conscious bias, or you want a session on microaggressions, you want a session on challenging derogatory language. They are all there. They can be done in person, but they work really well virtually. So some of our mats now have worked with us over a couple of years, and they pick 4 or 5 themes a year, 4 or 5 dates, and we curate a virtual training series, but they also get the recordings of all the sessions, and we do a kind of a private YouTube channel for all their staff to keep learning. So just another way you can work with us around the kind of the training side of stuff. So I thought I'd share some more information here around partners, but also case studies to give you some ideas. So these are our main partners. We work with loads and loads of people, but our main partners over the last kind of year, we've got relationships with curriculum companies, coaching companies, recruitment companies, and different sort of like training companies. And it's interesting who we worked with a couple of years ago, who then went quiet, but they've come back to working with us as well. So we've got ongoing different partnerships and collaborations there. So I thought I'd give you some different case studies. Here's one case study that we've been working with this group of people for 3 years. In year one, 5 of them, 6 of them did our program. So that was the CEO, the COO, and the head teachers. I think they actually sponsored one of the heads from a school that was going to join them to join us as well. So they wanted to do a 1 year strategic leadership training to get their heads around what they needed to know and what they were trying to achieve. By the second year, we helped them with their whole MAT conference, and we set a team of people to go and run sessions. And they had those consistent kind of like thematic inputs. They also asked us to do an in-person evening session with all of their governors. And they then curated a 5 part virtual series for their staff on 5 different key themes. This year, that then spun into the fact that anti-racism was their biggest need. So they asked us to run extra training in person for all of their staff in their primary schools. We also went in and delivered some assemblies for their pupils in the schools that had a white majority staff who weren't confident enough to run those assemblies themselves. And we also then did a second part to that virtual series. So that's one way of thinking about a 3 year plan. I'll give you the next one. This one was again starting with the head teacher and a DEIB leader who did our program, but they booked that on and they also simultaneously booked in the inset. I think we did January with this group of people. They then wanted a follow-up virtual session with their SLT and a follow-up virtual session with their governors. So that all happened in year one, that kind of, I guess, setting the foundation, but also the strategy. They then wanted to go on and do all of their HODs across their group to do the Leading the Diverse Curriculum program because that was their priority. And they've also sent all of their beginner teachers and all their ECTs to our 2 virtual conferences. They then hosted a conference on DEIB for all staff. And they also attended and sent their staff to our curriculum conference and our leading DIB conference. Okay, so you can see a different way of kind of cutting it and curating what happens over those 3 years. So let me just pull out some top tips and then I'll come out and I can answer questions. So the top tip for me is thinking about like what's your starting point and what do you want your foundations to be. I really believe that all staff need a kind of an introductory session. An introduction to DEIB is our most popular session and or cultivating a culture of belonging. But I can't tell you how many schools book us for that one and then they don't invite the admin staff or the support staff to come to the training session, which I think is quite ironic. So thinking about what you want everyone to know to really do that baseline and then begin to think about the language and the literacy and how you can begin to drip feed, but also bring awareness. Establishing where you are, I get asked quite a lot about how to survey the stakeholders. I would always start with the staff survey first to work out where the staff are at, what they know, what they don't know, what they want to know, what their concerns are. And then you can go into the other stakeholders, do your pupil survey, your staff, your parent survey and begin to drip feed that kind of that thought leadership around exposure to blogs, books, podcasts. Then when you are clear where you are and what your kind of like your budget is, your time is, what your priorities are, then you can begin to target your DIB training by stakeholder group. You can then begin to curate the training. So it's little and often it's over time. We're not overwhelming people because that is the word I hear the most in my work. People feel overwhelmed. And you can begin to cascade the knowledge and sort of like interject the paid for training with some of the free stuff such as toolkits. And then you can begin to develop your strand leads where you've got a small little group of people looking at the curriculum, another group looking at pastoral, someone on the governing body, SLT. So you're beginning to like almost like create your different threads. And then that leads to infrastructure. One of the things I'd ask you to think about as you end this year, and I know we've got different scales of systems on the call, is like what have you already got in place when it comes to representation at all the different kind of like the levels of the school, college, or trust? And if you compared that to safeguarding, what gaps do you have, and how do you begin to move towards closing those gaps and having someone responsible in each group? So we often start by helping a school or a trust appoint a lead. So you've got someone strategically responsible for it. Sometimes they don't sit on SLT, and that can be a barrier. So you then need someone strategically who works with them operationally. Then you name your governors or your trustees who are going to have sight of this. And then you create your volunteer base, your kind of like your working party, the people who are going to keep the energy going. That's my kind of top tips for getting started. I'm sure you've got lots of that in place already, but perhaps think about where your gaps are. Another couple of ways of thinking about it. If you think about DEIB as a golden thread, and then you look at your offer, your training offer as a setting, thinking about which stakeholders have been upskilled and engaged, and which stakeholder groups need to be considered, and making sure there is opportunity and coverage for all those different groups to be thinking about and talking about what does DEIB need for them. For those of you who came to my session last week, I was talking about the fact I used to always have a day in July and curate all the CPD for the year ahead, mapping it all out, working out my gaps. And then I did that at a trust level when I then got promoted. And there was often some groups getting multiple opportunities and some groups getting no opportunity. So thinking about how you can distribute that and balance that out. And then I think the bigger kind of questions are like, what are the emerging themes or priorities? DIB training often feels quite reactive. There's been a complaint, there's been an issue, something has happened. So we're going to get some training in. And that's one way to kind of level things out. But we want to try and then flip that longer term to think about what are the key priorities for our community? What's the dialogue we want to be curating? And how do we get ahead of some of those problems rather than always feeling like we're knee-jerky and on the kind of the back foot? So here's just some of the kind of the themes, all kind of like linked themes that are coming up, and I'm seeing a real change in the requests we're getting right now. I'm getting more and more bias requests, and that's like from about 7 years ago. It's just really curious seeing the kind of the patterns. So we're getting lots of requests around anti-racism, racial equity. I should imagine lots around trans awareness and gender diversity, particularly in boarding schools, who are really looking at that. Just got this new toolkit on masculinity because of everything that's come out since the kind of the adolescence kind of series back in the spring. Lots on neuro inclusion. That's a very trendy topic at the moment. And actually, 1 in 4 people have a disability. So it does hit a lot of different stakeholders to think about ableism and neuro inclusion. A lot of our schools are experiencing an increase in multilingualism in their student, staff, and parent bodies and don't quite know what to do with it, how to work with diverse communities. So we've got a partnership with Better Bilingual around that. And then the more kind of workplace culture pieces, lots of requests around psychological safety and trauma-informed practices. I do lots of training around recruitment and leadership pipelines and thinking about the kind of the strategic intent around recruitment and retention and development. One of my team is Emma, who runs MTPT. So we're doing loads of work around flexible working, parenthood, motherhood, family-friendly schools and trusts. And then we've got Benny doing all the work around curriculum and Sahara's books coming out around belonging in the classrooms. That's a really big thread of our work. And then we do lots of work around the kind of the allyship piece with the staff stakeholders, but also with the pupil stakeholders, helping the young people to think about them being change agents and what kind of citizens they want to be. I think this is my final slide. So just sort of like a recap here of the different opportunities and thinking about where are we inserting DEIB and where are the gaps? Are we seeing it as part of our cultural work and part of our curriculum work? Where does it sit in our strategy and our governance? How can we think about our leadership training opportunities and that pipeline piece? A lot of the kind of the DFE Teaching School Council, former Teaching School Council offer doesn't have DEI present. So the MPQs are lacking, the ECF provision is lacking. So thinking about how we weave that in and add on DEIB content. We're doing lots of work with HR teams around kind of unconscious bias and inclusive recruitment, but also around the coaching piece, and then thinking about how it feeds into those other threads. And then thinking about how you are balancing DIB across the year through your curated reading, research opportunities, and all the different kind of CPD opportunities that come up, both internally and externally. When I ran the professional learning offer at Harris, I did a weekly newsletter of what was on, but also what was happening, just signposted out. And then when I was ahead head, we used to have all the signposting to all the different community activities in the grassroots that our staff wouldn't have known about had we not have curated it. So I think sometimes it's just about being the signposter to this is happening in Birmingham this weekend. Do you know about it, kind of thing. So when you get the deck, you've got lots of quick links here to those different various bits and pieces, but I'm conscious I've just spoken at you for 34 slides. So let me just come out and see what reflections we've got or what questions we've got or what landed.